The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
The push for World War III, forced vaccinations, forced exposure to lethal 5G frequency transmissions, record hurricanes, record heat, record forest fires, biosphere die-off, new laws to grant warrantless searches and seizures. The list goes on and on and on of the converging catastrophes that are closing in on all of us. A message to those in academia and agencies who are hiding in the shadows, towing the official narrative of lies for the power structure while the ship goes down. Find your courage and stand up while you can. Make your voice heard while it still matters. Lest you take your last breath knowing you could have made a difference, but you didn't. So many try to convince me that the general population, which of course includes the legions of honorless order followers, are in no way responsible for the dark horizon we now all face. Many try to convince me that it's only the minute minority of global elite who deserve all the blame for how bad things are and for the unfolding collapse we're all about to face head on. But is this completely true? And I'm not talking about those that are struggling with just day-to-day survival. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the rest. And they know who they are. Is the majority of the population completely without responsibility? On the coming 16th anniversary of 9/11, we would do well to remember and consider just how willfully blind and willfully in denial the vast majority of the population actually is. When 3,000 of the world's top architects and engineers state on the record that the official 9/11 narrative is scientifically impossible, the official story is impossible scientifically, and when 3,000 of the world's top architects and engineers tell us that the World Trade Center buildings were taken down by controlled demolitions, which they have proof of, and there is virtually no reaction from the general population, none. When the 9/11 Architects and Engineers Group spends tens of thousands of dollars on the 6-story New York high-rise billboard in New York Times Square, this digital billboard that continuously showed World Trade Center 7, the third building, coming down in 7 seconds at free fall speed, when it never got hit by anything, and still there is no response from even the residents of New York City, where the false flag tragedy of 9/11 actually happened, then we must all consider just how much blame the general population deserves to bear. The few could not rule tyrannically over the many without the complete apathy and thus total consent of the many. And now, what other false flag events do we face? From weather manipulation, 70 years of proven cyclone manipulation by the U.S. military and the U.S. government. Now we have all-out weather warfare being waged on populations of the U.S. Though hurricanes would spawn and do spawn on their own, they are being manipulated, and the proof bears this out. I'll get to more of this later in this show. But when will the willful denial and apathy of the population end so that we might face what is converging on us and have any chance of averting total planetary omnicide? This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour for September 9th, 2017. The weekly Global Alert News Hour is commercial-free, paid for by GeoEngineeringWatch.org. The news you may not want to hear, but that you need to know. This program is broadcast throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, 105.7 FM. The Global Alert News Hour is also broadcast on the East Coast by the PRN radio network at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Other affiliates are also picking up the show because it's free to them. We charge nothing, and it's commercial-free. Another reminder for those that decide to actually investigate the most critical issues and threats we face, those that live in the Shasta County, Redding area, there's a limited supply of free informational materials at Orchard Nutrition in Redding. These materials cover the proven vaccination dangers, the lethal climate engineering threat, and the factually verifiable truth about 9/11. The materials are available to those who will put them to use. In this broadcast, coverage of the escalating, again, weather warfare being waged by our government and others, not only on countries around the world, but against our own country. Why? For what purpose? Is the escalating weather warfare a prelude to global conflict? Conflict that will be further fueled by our imploding biosphere, which is ultimately the bottom line. Everything else is simply distraction. When the planet no longer supports life, when there's no more habitat for humans, that's the end of the road. And we are perilously close to that point. In regard to factually filling in the blanks on the climate engineering weather warfare issue, some have asked me why I didn't accept the invitation from Natural News, the Natural News website, to discuss climate engineering on the air with them, to discuss climate engineering facts. And the bottom line is I did accept publicly, only to have my publicly posted acceptance on their site, Natural News, deleted not once but twice. It seems Natural News may have been bluffing and was perhaps not prepared for me to call their bluff. A friend tried to post a comment again. This time it remained posted, but there was no response again from Natural News. I sent the same message to the official Contact Us link for Natural News. This was almost a week ago. Not a word from Natural News. It seems their offer again to debate the facts about the true state of the climate and the climate engineering rally was again only a bluff. Many unfortunately blindly accept or even embrace completely false narratives that are so far from reality it's difficult to comprehend. In the past, I've been publicly challenged by others to debate the climate engineering reality and the true state of the climate. Ed Griffin, Lord Monckton, climate scientist Tim Ball. I've always publicly and immediately accepted the challenge, only to have the challenging individuals refuse to respond to the acceptance. My offers to debate hard facts with all of these individuals stands, but it seems their challenges, like with Natural News, were also nothing more than bluffs. Upcoming interviews that I do have scheduled, I'll try to make announcements about this more often. I generally don't get to this. I'm scheduled with the Alex Jones Show for tomorrow, Sunday, September 16th, 9 a.m. Pacific. I'm scheduled for a full 2-hour interview with Jimmy Church, large Southern California, worldwide broadcast with Jimmy Church as well, 7 p.m. Pacific, Monday night. I'll try to announce other upcoming future interviews. My apologies that I have not in the past. I just simply can't get to everything. For the record, I hear from many who falsely believe power structure puppet Glenn Beck would somehow be our ally in the fight against climate engineering. If he only knew, people claim. And earlier this week, Glenn Beck played some of the audio from the Hurricane Harvey manipulation video I did several days before that. Why? So he could do what he was told to do, to marginalize the climate engineering issue as fake news. To Mr. Beck, I would say this. Every science institution in the world is discussing climate engineering, as is every government in the world. There are volumes of data to prove climate engineering is a reality, including government documents, many of which are posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. And so let's consider this. In reality, Glenn Beck is nothing more than a multi-level marketing con artist who knows exactly how long his leash is. And his job, as people are rapidly waking up to climate engineering, was to do his best to marginalize it. That's the real Glenn Beck. Consider that. And how many have left the battle against climate engineering, the battle to expose and stop climate engineering, and sat back down on the sidelines? And for those that have opted out of the battle, I plead with you, get off the bench. Do your part while you can, while it still can make a difference. Share credible informational materials on climate engineering with your circle. For anyone looking to answer a specific question on climate engineering, in most cases, if you search geoengineeringwatch.org and the particular issue you're trying to find out about, whether it's ozone layer destruction, engineered snowstorms, geoengineering creating drought, search geoengineeringwatch.org and the particular subject you're looking for, and you will likely find an article. We have about 2,000 articles on our site. Hard to keep track of them all, but you can generally find them that way easily. And if you're looking for credible informational materials that will help to wake your family and friends up effectively, they're also available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Final short statement. A number of imposter comments from someone pretending to be me have been brought to my attention. I don't post on other sites or blogs, and if you see a comment that says it's me, it's not. With the single exception of the debate acceptance I had posted on Natural News, which I spoke of earlier. So if you see a comment again from someone pretending to be me, answering as if it's me, it's not, unless it's on our site, geoengineeringwatch.org or our Facebook pages. Moving on, headlines. As the biosphere implodes, again, weather warfare is being further ramped up to unimaginable levels. The power structure will continue to try and tighten their grip. There is absolutely no question that Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma are being manipulated with aerosol dispersions overhead and radio frequency microwave transmissions from overhead and on the ground. And those who don't understand just how malleable atmospheric moisture is, how easy it is to affect atmospheric moisture, air currents, and so forth with frequency transmissions, search that subject. Search GeoEngineeringWatch.org, frequency transmissions, water. And you'll find powerful videos here. Search it online. You'll find other people have posted videos, some of which we have utilized their work. It's profound, the effect that frequencies have on water, water vapor, atmospheric particulates. It's absolutely profound. You have to see it to believe it. There's no question weather warfare has been fully unleashed. Something interesting I want to mention on headlines, as the walls close in, as societal disruption is going to increase, and certainly Texas, now Florida, who knows who's next, because this is not over by any stretch. Trump has just signed two important bills. Moving on to headlines now. One bill that repeals a current bill, the intent of which, I should say, was to stop the militarization of the police force, and another bill that now makes it possible for police to raid without having a warrant. This is the marching toward a totalitarian state. If you don't think Trump's a part of it, think again. Obama, Clinton, Bush's, all a part of it. Puppets in the play. How has the power structure been able to fuel the insanity for so long, to control everything? By the endless money printing from the central bankers. But the walls are now closing in on the central bankers. Here's a headline: the real BRICS bombshell, BRICS nations. Putin reveals fair multipolar world concept in which oil contracts could bypass the US dollar and be traded with oil, yuan, and gold. And that's what the US empire has been fighting so diligently against for so long. It's why Saddam Hussein was taken down. It's why Gaddafi was taken down. Other countries as well, because they wanted to disconnect from the dollar, and the U.S. empire cannot afford that. It's happening anyway. All empires collapse. This one is no different. The problem is now the whole biosphere is going down with us. And the desperation of the power structure now is far greater than most yet realize. And it's getting worse by the day. How many know this? And here's a headline: before Harvey. All these things converge together. 10 days before Hurricane Harvey, Mr. Trump nixed regulations to protect infrastructure during a flood. From that report, 10 days before Hurricane Harvey descended upon Texas, wreaking havoc and causing widespread flooding, President Donald Trump signed an executive order revoking a set of regulations that would have made federally funded infrastructure less vulnerable to flooding. Let's consider this. Perhaps in Trump's view, making infrastructure more vulnerable was good for business by producing economic activity from rebuilding after the engineered weather warfare events like Harvey and Irma. And there's numerous factors relating to both of these storms which confirm that the historically verifiable hurricane manipulation programs that I spoke about earlier, I've done 2 videos on those in the last week. They're at GeoEngineeringWatch.org. You can find an update on Hurricane Harvey and Irma. But these verifiably manipulated storms and the hurricane manipulated programs of the U.S. military are now very advanced. And for at least 70 years, such manipulation and experimentation has been going on. Don't believe me. Please, only investigate on your own. And start with Project Cirrus in 1947. 70 years ago, Project Cirrus, the beginning of historically documented U.S. military hurricane manipulation programs. This is also important to consider for many who have falsely accepted conclusions being pushed by certain sources that claim hurricanes are now all formed from climate manipulation, as if the climate can't form hurricanes anymore. And this is patently false. The oceans are scaldingly hot. Some places in the Arctic are 25 degrees above normal. Ocean temperatures in many other places are well into the 90s. Warm oceans are the fuel for hurricanes. They are trying to form, have been trying to form. So the hurricanes are not necessarily being created, but they're being manipulated. And that is certain. Not that we know that they can't spawn a rotation and thus create a hurricane, but it's happening on its own. A warming planet must have more such cyclonic rotations, must carry more moisture in the atmosphere. The laws of physics say so. So after 4,323 days, well over 12 years, of major hurricane landfall drought in the U.S., and for those who keep throwing Hurricane Sandy at me, what about Hurricane Sandy? Please look it up, and please listen to what I'm saying. No major hurricane landfall. Sandy was not a major hurricane, even though it did major damage. So please hear everything I'm saying. I know I cover a lot of data. It's hard to follow, perhaps, trying to cover as much ground as I can in the time allotted. So after 4,323 days of major hurricane landfall drought in the U.S., now the weather makers who've been actively suppressing U.S. hurricane impacts are not only allowing the cyclones to decimate our own country, but they're manipulating them to be sure maximum impacts occur in the locations that they choose. And I'll post a full update video on escalating weather warfare scenarios in the coming week, when a full assessment again can be accurately done on the Irma impact that's occurring now. To have a better understanding of the overall picture, I asked everyone consider and remember this again. A warmer planet will try to create more rain and more cyclonic rotations. It's trying to reach an energy equilibrium, which has been blown to bits by human activity. The energy balance of the planet has been completely obliterated. We are in free fall now into an abrupt climate shift. Climate engineering is making it far worse, not better. Climate engineering, again, which is weather warfare and biological warfare. But the laws of physics make clear that nature will try to respond to this warming. The atmosphere carries more moisture, 7% more moisture for every 1 degree C of warming, more cyclonic rotations. The planet is trying to cool itself, and nature's responses to the warming conditions are being manipulated to serve the agendas of those in power. Weather warfare is a primary method of pulling the noose around all of our collective necks. So many agendas of the power structure, not just this or that. The descending biosphere and the attempt to hide that, as I've documented in both my recent videos about Harvey and Irma. The desire of the power structure to mask the true severity of climate implosion is one of the primary objectives of climate engineering. But there are many, many more. So we must not think dichotomously. And for those that are in the consistently engineered cool-down zones of the eastern U.S., again, I've documented this in the Irma and Harvey videos, understand that the cooler temperatures are only a shallow surface layer of air. What is it like at altitude? And here's a statement that I just received from a commercial airline pilot who, of course, must remain anonymous at this time. He stated this, I'm quoting directly, "I'm shocked at the condition of our atmosphere, sea level to 45,000 feet. White haze, haze, haze. Gone are the clear blue skies. The skies almost always are milky white. I dare not mention that it's from SRM, solar radiation management, or particulates sprayed by man as a desperate attempt to reverse the effects of man-made global warming." He goes on, "Winter last year in a Gulfstream GIV, that's a Gulfstream private jet, off the coast of Washington, we could not climb over 38,000 feet due to the extremely warm ISA temperatures outside of 25 degrees C above normal. 25 C, that's about 40 plus degrees, 45 degrees above normal. We should have been able to reach 45,000 feet with our weight, but we couldn't. The air would not support the weight of the aircraft. The UV," he's continuing now, "the UV is off the charts. Just go into the sun, you can feel it. Our aircraft in the metal hangars are hotter than the outside air temperature by 5 degrees or more Fahrenheit. Just think, deck chairs, Titanic." These are his words. Final statement. "You think this year is fun? Just wait. My feeling is the ramp up is going to be unreal. But I'm not worried. I have my 401k and money in the bank and stored food." He pauses and says, "What a joke." My thanks to this pilot, whom I'll continue to communicate with. But he understands how serious it is, and at least he's beginning to step forward. He's supplying data to other pilots. And that's the goal. That's the goal, with sharing credible data, again, which we have available at the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. So you have credible facts that you don't have to try to recall, remember, or recite. You can pass them on in a much more effective manner and get them in the hands of people like these pilots, news agencies, other types of environmental groups. The list is endless, absolutely endless, of the people we need to get these materials into the hands of so that we can wake them up. Continuing, another relevant headline. Hundreds treated in hospital after chemical haze descends on Sussex coast. Now, back to the statement from this pilot and the people in the eastern half of the U.S., the most populated zones in the U.S. that are under engineered cool down with all the moisture that's coming in from Harvey, from Katia in the Gulf, which was used as a moisture pump to put more moisture in the air, and that moisture is chemically ice nucleated. Chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Patented processes to spray chemically nucleating, endothermic reacting materials into the clouds, into the moisture, to cause an endothermic reaction which makes a cold, dense layer of air that descends to the ground, helping to keep certain regions cooled off again and again. And a reminder, one of the primary objectives of the cyclones, atmospheric water pumps, to move the moisture in excessive quantities into the regions they need, to migrate it north across the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, and to be utilized in chemical ice nucleated cool downs. Again, look at the maps, look at the data in the Irma, Harvey posts that I put up. But back to this headline from Sussex coast. Let me read from this report, then I'll elaborate. Hundreds of people have been treated in a hospital after a mysterious chemical haze descended on the East Sussex coast. A stretch of coastline was evacuated after the haze left dozens of holidaymakers vomiting with streaming eyes and sore throats. Pictures later emerged showing a mist so thick that it almost completely obscured Beachy Head Lighthouse. That's a location. Steve Carson, commander of the UK Coast Guard, said this seems to have been caused by an unknown haze coming in from the sea, but the source has not yet been established, and I'm sure it won't be. Kyle Crickmore, who was enjoying the bank holiday week and sunshine at the beach in Burling Gap with his family, tweeted, "Some sort of chemical incident at Burling Gap, eyes streaming, and there's a strong smell of chlorine in the air." Chlorine. Let's consider this, that chlorine, or ammonium gas, and barium, we have various elements that are used in endothermic reacting processes that are part of the patented chemical ice nucleation for weather modification applications. So, do we have here, from the moisture that's streaming up from some of the moisture pumps I mentioned earlier, streaming across the Atlantic, trying to cool down parts of Europe, being sprayed by these chemical elements to create that chemical cool down? Did someone get too big a dose on the Sussex coast? Is that what happened? Because we're seeing some of the same elements discussed, the same odors we would expect. This is being ramped up to lethal levels, and we are all breathing these materials in. And we have the lab tests to prove this, by the way. We have lab tests, 70 in Northern California. We have lab tests from all over the globe from various locations. We're not guessing, we're not speculating, we're not hypothesizing. Chemical elements are absolutely being used to create short-term toxic cool downs. There's no question about this. We're just simply asking people to examine the data, weave it in with the headlines, as I'm trying to do now here. So what's happening with the overall picture on the planet right now? Because while the catastrophic cyclones are taking center stage, what unfolding cataclysm is occurring in the superheating and burning western U.S. and Canada? And not just there. Spain, Portugal, locations all over the planet. And by the way, I mentioned on a previous program, Australia just had its warmest winter ever. And of course, I hear from somebody in southeastern Australia that says, no, that's not true. Because outside their window, it wasn't true. Again, just like in the U.S., the most densely populated zones are being subjected to chemical engineered cool downs again and again. That's the case in southeastern Australia, where the most population is. So this person, like many in the U.S., never bothered to take the time to look up or investigate what I said, just simply concluded from whatever was happening outside his window had to be happening across the whole country. We have to get over that kind of completely tunnel vision thinking. Have to get over that. Actually investigate. And for those in the eastern half of the lower 48, I'll state this again. You are just over 1/2 of 1%, 1/200th of the Earth's surface area. Because it's cool in your area right now, do you think that's really a reflection of the entire world? It's not. Please investigate. Here's a headline. Wildfires rage across American West with record high temperatures from that report. Dozens of forest fires and brush fires are currently burning across 8 western states, forcing thousands to flee, destroying homes and closing highways. Enormous volumes of smoke and ash are being thrown into the atmosphere as more than 1 million acres have burned in the past week alone, creating hazardous breathing conditions in many parts of the Pacific Northwest. The smoke also provides cover for aerosol spraying, which is absolutely occurring. Over the top of that smoke, we can see it on radar. Smoke provides a cover for them. So although the cyclones are taking center stage, again, is the cataclysm any less in the Pacific Northwest? And in fact, to carry that theme further, unlike a hurricane, where things can be rebuilt if the resources are there in shorter order, when forests burn down now due to the current climate conditions, in many, if not most cases, they will not regrow. They cannot regrow. And as I've stated in previous programs, 15 years ago, in my location in Northern California, I had a 95% success rate on planting saplings, which I could plant myself in a day, about 300. Now, none will grow. None will make it through the summer. None. The conditions are that harsh. And for those that think the drought is over in California, and we have agencies lying about this, by the way, on the drought monitor stations, they're lying. The conditions are drier right now. Fuel moistures are lower right now than any of the previous drought years since 2000. Lower. Conditions are worse, and nobody's talking about it. So the cyclones are not the only problem. The entire planet is descending into total meltdown. We have methane blowing out from the Siberian tundra. If you don't believe that, search methane blowouts Siberia, and you will be shocked what you see. Massive craters blowing out of the tundra, massive, 200 feet deep in some cases, spewing methane into the atmosphere that's fanning out over the planet like a layer of glass, trapping heat. The fires burn. That's fueling another feedback loop because it pumps all that greenhouse gas into the sky, makes a black surface which absorbs more of the UV from the sun. We have an ozone layer that's being virtually destroyed by climate engineering, so there's more thermal energy hitting that black surface. Everything starts to feed itself. The equation is as non-linear as it could be. We're free-falling into a state where the planet will not support life much longer. That's how severe our situation is. That's why I focus on the biosphere so continuously. That's the bottom line. Everything else is simply distraction. Another headline. Here's how climate change is a, quote, death sentence in Afghanistan. From that report, the central highlands of Afghanistan are a world away from the congested chaos of the country's cities. Hills roll across colossal uninhabited spaces fringed by snow-flecked mountains set against blistering blue skies. But record heat is damaging crops, harvests, and ways of life. Places we don't hear about. Afghanistan, just a war zone for most people, somewhere off on the other side of the world where our country invaded under false pretext after 9/11. 9/11, the license to unleash the U.S. military-industrial complex. And all the while, the order followers and the complacent society sleeps, willfully apathetic. There's plenty of blame to go around here. How are things in other parts of the world? Another headline. Greenland is burning still. Again, covered an earlier story on this about a month ago. Still burning. Wildfires and floods surge worldwide. Climate chaos is here. It's going to get worse rapidly. Many causes. Anthropogenic activity. Countless forms of anthropogenic activity. Anyone who denies that the human race has been an incredibly poor steward of planet Earth is not living in reality. Not living in reality. We've decimated this planet from top to bottom. And the single greatest form of human assault against the web of life, against all life, is climate engineering. Again, which is nothing more than, or nothing less than weather warfare or biological warfare. 2 mantras to include. I'm going to remind everybody about this every week. There's no legitimate discussion about the climate unless climate engineering is included first and foremost, and there's no legitimate discussion about climate engineering unless chemical ice nucleation for weather modification and engineered cooldowns are included in the discussion. So for all those that listen to this program, don't be one of the majority, at least the current majority of the population, that's not willing to actually investigate, but who wants just to be told and to believe that everything will always magically work itself out, that don't be one of the segments of the population that wants to be told and wants to believe that the planet can be looted, plundered, and pillaged, and raped indefinitely without consequence. And for those who believe this, you'll soon find out the hard way just how mistaken you were. But don't be one of those people. Choose to open your eyes. An example I've given many times in the past, very simple, but I'll give it again now. If you're standing in the middle of the freeway, are you better off facing traffic or turning your back to it? Think about it. From multiple sources, Trump names climate science denier to run NASA. How much do we need on Trump to understand that those who think that he's some rogue gift from God, and I hear this, to save the world, what reality are you living in? And then if I criticize Trump, everybody jumps to the conclusion I must love Clinton. And I've said it over and over. I can't stand to even look at Clinton or Obama or the Bushes. I have to repeat this every time because if I don't, people don't hear it. And I get all these comments from people who can't seem to hear anything other than what they wanted to hear. Trump deserves immense criticism. He's a part of the problem. And just because he might be a little different faction of the criminal cabal that's running the planet doesn't mean he's not still part of the criminal cabal, because he is. And while the planet implodes, what's he doing? Exactly what the military-industrial fossil fuel complex would want him to do. Stack the deck. That's what he's doing. From this report, President Donald Trump plans to nominate Representative Jim Bridenstine, Republican, Oklahoma, a climate science denier, to be administrator of NASA. NASA scientists have led the way in documenting the scientific reality of climate change. But in 2013, Bridenstine not only gave a speech on the House floor filled with standard denier talking points, he actually ended his remarks with a demand that President Obama apologize for funding research into climate science. Well, we could pick this whole statement apart, couldn't we? One, we know NASA is nothing more than a branch of the military-industrial complex. But here's the problem with NASA's data, just like Al Gore's data, in regard to the state of the climate. It's far worse than anything NASA has said or anything Al Gore has said. And those who don't believe that, and I'm not asking you to believe it, I'm asking you to investigate, but if you choose simply to walk away because you don't want to believe it, you'll soon find out, as I just stated, the hard way, how mistaken you were. If you care at all about the future of your children or yourself, you'll open your eyes, look at reality, look at hard data, forget about Al Gore the criminal, Donald Trump the criminal, Hillary Clinton the criminal, and all the rest. Get rid of biases and preconceptions and look at real data, because the walls are closing in on all of us. So Trump, again, continuing to stack the deck. Another headline: New Zealand needs to act now to protect people and property. Leaked coastal erosion report urges. Leaked because the New Zealand government refused to publish it, just like our government is trying to sweep everything under the rug, and Donald Trump helping to do that. Why? Because he's all for climate engineering, all for it. Claims there's nothing wrong with the climate, but yet they're all for climate engineering. If you don't believe it, search, as I said earlier in this program, search geoengineeringwatch.org, Trump supports geoengineering, and find our publication on that. His administration openly supporting ramping up climate engineering. That's the bottom line. From this report from New Zealand, a leaked government report calls for immediate action to help protect thousands of people and $19 billion in property at risk from increased flooding and coastal erosion. And then, of course, I'll have to stop here for a moment. How many people do I hear from who say, the oceans aren't rising, the land is just sinking everywhere? What an incredibly baseless conclusion and statement. When we have film footage of ice melting all over the globe, and anyone who wants to see frontline footage on that, watch Chasing Ice. Not anybody's opinion. Film footage, decide with your own eyes. When that ice melts and runs into the ocean, what do you think is going to happen with the ocean? It's going to rise. It's rising exponentially right now. Continuing from the New Zealand report, the report commissioned by the Ministry for Environment was delivered in April, but has still not been released. It includes the fact that $19 billion worth of buildings, about 43,000 homes, 133,000 people, 5 airports, more than 2,000 kilometers of road and 46 kilometers of railway face higher levels of coastal risk as a consequence of rising sea levels. Not sinking land, rising sea levels. And by the way, to put this in perspective, there's about 21 to 24 feet of sea level rise built into Greenland. If that ice all goes, there's about 197 feet in Antarctica, another 15 feet in the rest of the Earth's glaciers. It's happening right now. It will take a bit of time, but it's happening exponentially. It only takes a couple feet of sea level rise to change reality for all those that live along coasts, and it's happening now. Here's a headline of half-truth from the circles of academia that have completely betrayed populations and the web of life as we know it. And academia has. Climate science community has betrayed the world. And yes, they're threatened. I understand that. There's gag orders on all National Weather Service and NOAA employees. You can look that up. GeoEngineeringWatch.org gag order. Look it up. Don't believe me. So I know there's threats on these people, but at what point do they band together and stand up anyway? When do they do that? When the house burns to the ground and there's nothing left but a pile of ashes? That's too late. So for those in academia, I implore you to stand up and contact GeoEngineeringWatch.org, because one of our attorneys, our primary attorney, and the firm he is a partner of, specializes in protecting whistleblowers. Stand up. Tell us what you know while it still matters. Our legal efforts are ongoing. Please tell us what you know. Academia, find your courage. Do the right thing. Now, here's the half-truth headline. CO2 is changing the jet stream in ways that will create more Harveys. First, before I get to an excerpt from this headline, it's not just CO2, it's methane. And I'm not talking about cow flatulence. I'm talking about thawing and releasing massive methane deposits from Siberia, from the seafloor around the world. It's what's happened in the Bermuda Triangle for some 80, 90 years. It's thawing, releasing methane from the seafloor. That's what's responsible for the ship sinkings there. It's been going on around the world for a long, long time. We've covered it on GeoEngineering Watch over and over, so it's not just CO2. Another deception from the climate science community, because they will not talk about the massive methane deposits that are thawing and releasing. Rather, you have the pointing at cow flatulence and things that make people angry because they know there must be something more than that. So disinformation on every front. But methane is also covering the planet, as I referred to earlier. But it's not just those greenhouse gases that are changing the jet stream. We have massive jet stream manipulation with countless ionosphere microwave heater installations that their very purpose is to alter the jet stream. And none of this acknowledged from academia. More deception of omissions from academia, betraying the public, betraying the web of life. From this report, climate science predicted a weaker jet stream, and Harvey stalled because of a weakened jet stream. And that's a lie. Harvey stalled because it was being held in place by massive microwave ground-based transmissions, which we recorded at geoengineeringwatch.org. Look at the Harvey hurricane coverage video that we did. It's under the top stories section. And you can see the animations of the massive microwave transmissions from ground-based transmitters in Brownsville, San Antonio, Texas, Shreveport, holding that hurricane in place with radio frequency transmission. Look at it. Don't believe me. Decide for yourself. So this is the sort of sifting through of information that we all must do, and this is where academia is betraying us by not telling us the truth. Global warming, this is from this report, global warming is juicing more and more storms into super hurricanes like Harvey and Sandy. That part is true. More warming, atmosphere holds more moisture, oceans are warmer, that's more fuel for the hurricanes. That's all true, but who's manipulating those hurricanes? And who's deciding which hurricanes are blown apart or steered out to sea, as has happened for well over 4,200 days in the U.S., or now we have the opposite. They're guiding them into massive target locations. Who decides to play God with the weather? The climate engineers. Half-truths everywhere, and we must all learn to sift through the information, to sort out what's real and what's not. Another headline, and while I'm going through the following headlines, consider the opportunity for biowarfare. That flooding presents an opportunity for the power structure to use biowarfare elements. More on that in a few minutes, but I'll go through the headlines now. But consider that as a means by which the power structure can further debilitate societies by making them sick. Over 100,000 flee their homes after heavy rains and flooding in Nigeria. We don't hear that here, because for most Americans, they only care about America in so many cases, and that's very sad. Very, very disappointing, if you will. And in so many cases, so many Americans simply take the official narrative on everything and don't even bother to look for what they're not being told. And those are often the biggest lies of all, the lies of omission, what we're not being told. More headlines. South Asia floods. Appeals for help as monsoon rains cause havoc in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. In Lagos, More than 100,000 people have had to flee their homes after heavy rains and flooding in Nigeria's southeastern state. President Muhammadu Buhari said. This is stories that most Americans have never heard of. They don't know what's happening around the globe. They don't know the amount of people that are dying right now due to starvation. And when these people in Southeast Asia, they have no aid or assistance coming like many in the U.S. do. But we are fast reaching a point where no one will be able to help anyone. And that's when the fun is really going to start. That's when chaos really ensues, the law of the jungle. And we are perilously near to that point, and the power structure knows it. Many agendas with what they're doing right now with the weather warfare, many, to mire the population in their own struggles so they not only can't focus on the bigger picture, they can't stand up to the tyranny behind that bigger picture. That's happening now. Another headline along the same theme, African nations on brink of famine. From Nairobi, Kenya, the world's largest humanitarian crisis in 70 years. It's going to be much worse than that, by the way. Has been declared in 3 African countries on the brink of famine. Just as President Donald Trump's proposed foreign aid cuts threaten to pull the United States from its historic role as the world's top emergency donor. Another point along these lines, when people hear about the massive aid packages the U.S. gives to many foreign countries, so often that's simply smoke and mirrors. Foreign countries that have brutal dictators in the past would be given massive loans, none of which ever benefited the population in any way, shape, or form. And then later, when a massive, quote, aid package is given, that's applied to the interest on the loan that was given to the dictator. So it's transfers from one hand into the other, never, ever benefits the population again. And no aid was ever actually given. It was simply applied to, again, the interest for the loan that was given to a dictator that never benefited the people in the first place. So Americans think that they're giving much more than they actually are. And now, even what has been given is being pulled back. And this plugs into what I stated a few moments ago, that we are fast reaching a point where no one can help anyone. And that's when it's going to get very ugly, very quickly. Continuing from this report, if the deep cuts are approved by Congress and the U.S. does not contribute to Africa's current crisis, experts warn that the continent's growing drought and famine could have far-reaching effects, including a new wave of migrants heading to Europe and possibly more support for Islamic extremist groups. The conflict-fueled hunger crisis in Nigeria, Somalia, and South Sudan have culminated in a trio of potential famines hitting almost simultaneously. What did I report several months ago? I said, based on available data, 20 million people could starve to death in the next 6 months, and that was 4 or 5 months ago when I stated that. How does this plug into climate engineering? Because climate engineering has been used to cut the rain off for countless nations in order to bring them to their knees, in order to either to stabilize those nations and thus topple their governments and allow U.S. actual occupation or the U.S. to set up bases. We have U.S. boots on the ground in 156 countries around the world, from countries that don't like that occupation, understandably so. Why did they allow it? Because they were brought to their knees. And I will state again, I've stated it many times, as we know after 9/11, tracing this all the way back, Wesley Clark stating the countries that were on the agenda to be toppled in the coming years, all of which have been toppled, every single country was subjected to a once in 1,000 year drought by climate engineering, cutting off their moisture in order to topple those nations. And the same is true in Africa. So how many people, how many deaths has climate engineering already been responsible for? Not just from starvation, but from particulate pollution. When we have Alzheimer's and dementia as the number one cause of death in many countries now, in Western Europe even, we think it's perhaps second in the U.S. 1 in 3 seniors now dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. We are all breathing in massive amounts of toxic, bioavailable, bioaccumulative heavy metals, starting with aluminum. This is fact. It's in our air tests. Again, 70 in Northern California, unimaginable quantities of aluminum. Why doesn't the Alzheimer's Foundation report on this, by the way? Well, guess what? Because members of the aluminum industry sit on the Alzheimer's Foundation board. So when I tried to give $500 to the Alzheimer's Foundation to have a booth set up to show peer-reviewed study that aluminum was related to Alzheimer's and GeoEngineering was dropping aluminum on us, they would not let me make that donation, threatened to arrest me as soon as I showed up to that event, which, as I've stated already, I stayed invited them to arrest me. They didn't. And we proceeded, me and about a dozen activists, to spread information to every single person who attended. That's the kind of conflict of interest we have. People on the industries sitting the medical charities that are supposedly fighting an ailment that comes from that industry. Total hypocrisy. Back so many roads lead back to climate engineering, back to the forest fires and the melting down of the West. While the cyclones are being engineered, the meltdown in the West from the engineered high-pressure zone that's baking us under compressing air that creates the heat, forest fires that are created because we have bioavailable rain contaminating the soils and root systems, we have a disrupted hydrological cycle, we have more dry lightning because we have an electrically conductive atmosphere, we have intense UV from the destroyed ozone layer from climate engineering that's frying the foliage, we have an incendiary dust coating the foliage from every direction, whether we're talking about droughts, deluges, cyclones, forest fires, Alzheimer's, autism, from every direction on so many issues. So many roads lead back to climate engineering. That's why I'm focused on this issue. This isn't my pet issue. I never wanted to do this. I'm not politically oriented. I'm not an activist. I'm a father. I'm a person who feels I have a responsibility back to the whole because I've been given a lot of bonus time, which I've spoke about in earlier programs. All of us have a responsibility back to the whole. So what's happening around the world that Americans aren't paying attention to? And it's incredibly severe. Starvation, floods, and as I mentioned at the beginning of all these headlines on floods, what opportunity do those floods present for the power structure to perhaps thin the herd even more with pathogens? We know vaccinations are being used, and we know they're having that effect. We can argue the intent, but they're having that effect, and we have peer-reviewed study now on vaccinations in Africa, peer-reviewed studies that now show the mortality rate amongst the vaccinated children are 500% higher, 5 times more deaths in the vaccinated kids. Do you really think those vaccinations are about the common good or saving lives? Not at all. And not when you have Bill Gates to David Rockefeller stating on the record, 95% of the world's population needs to go. Wake up and look at the bigger picture, because we're in a fight for life right now. Continuing on this theme, let's go to Yemen. Again, the location where the U.S. is supplying weapons to the Saudis, who are destroying one of the poorest countries in the world. And what about the waterborne diseases there? Here's a report from Reuters. Yemen's cholera outbreak has infected 612,703 people and killed over 2,000 since it began in April. And some districts are still reporting sharp rises in new cases. Again, waterborne diseases, as I expressed earlier. From the World Health Organization and Yemen's health ministry showed on Tuesday, the epidemic, the most explosive on record in terms of its rapid spread, no surprise, given all the factors we've just considered, has continually confounded expectations. Soon after it began, the World Health Organization saw a worst-case scenario of 300,000 cases within 6 months. Now it's over double that. Consider all the things we just discussed. Another headline, South Asia floods. All over the world this is happening. The world's forgotten catastrophe. While Australian media has been saturated with coverage of the disastrous flooding in the U.S., town of Houston, a far more damaging and unfolding deadly humanitarian catastrophe is taking place. From that report, millions of people in South Asia are in need of urgent life-saving support after weeks of torrential rain and catastrophic flooding in Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. We don't hear anything about this, do we? And how many people do you think are going to die there from waterborne diseases? Another headline, thousands hit by malaria, dengue fever as South Asia's extreme floods recede from New Delhi. Thousands of people are suffering from an outbreak of diarrhea, malaria, and dengue in Bangladesh and Nepal. A parallel headline. And all of these locations that are being inundated with floods provides a palette on which countless forms of biological warfare can take place. And when we know now from peer-reviewed study the harm that's being done from vaccinations, the harm that's being done from the elements that are being used in climate engineering, that's why there's so much effort to hide climate engineering, GMO foods, we have fluoridated water. How many red flags do we need to understand and accept the fact that those in power not only see us as expendable, but as a liability? That's an inarguable fact at this point. And so many don't want to embrace that. So many people, and I've heard this more times than I could ever recall, in regard to the decimation of the planet, on which those in power also depend, that they wouldn't do this to themselves. But we have more than enough data to prove that that's simply not true, that that's a naive notion. Again, from the detonation of nuclear weapons to nuclear power, we have Fukushima that may kill us all if other factors don't first. We're building 60 more plants. We have enough nuclear weaponry to destroy humanity 12,000 times over, and we're building more of that. We're drilling all over the globe when the greenhouse gas buildup is going to turn this planet into Venus very quickly because of the feedback loops, because of methane and other factors, and climate engineering stacked on top. So we know we're not dealing with sanity. We know we're dealing with the cancer that is consuming the planet, and so much of society willing to cooperate with that. But if we would wake up and face reality, we may yet collectively accomplish profound good, even at this late hour. But that effort will take all of us. It can't be borne by a few for the many. It will take all of us. So back to the potential the power structure has to thin the herd or to mire populations in struggle by using flood zones to scatter waterborne diseases. And I'm not saying these diseases wouldn't happen on their own, not saying that. But why would we think that such biowarfare would not be used when we have so much proof that the power structure has no regard for life, morality, or anything except their own perpetuation of power? So when we have protozoa, bacteria, intestinal parasites, viruses, and some from the list include cholera, hepatitis, and malaria, salmonella. What other types of waterborne contamination and parasites might the power structure be using as a biowarfare agent in disaster zones, flooded disaster zones? Some that most have never heard of. Some that are scientifically proven to actually affect human behavior due to their infiltration into brain cells. The heavy metal and chemical contamination from the climate engineering fallout is already killing us slowly. But what happens if the power structure alters the mix into something much more lethal? I'll cover more on this in the next broadcast, but stand back and consider what we already know. That we know our government, without any regard for our troops, used Agent Orange in Vietnam, killing not only hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of civilians, but countless thousands of our own troops. We know that our government used highly toxic depleted uranium ammunition without the knowledge or consent of our troops in battle zones in the Middle East, permanently contaminating those areas and contaminating our own soldiers. We know that the U.S. military is routinely used as guinea pigs for anything the power structure wants to use them for. This is not a surprise or a secret at this point, is it? And yet, how many Americans continue to wave their flags, pretending that this is the great patriotic and moral nation with a power structure that's nothing more than a cancer, that's wreaking havoc around the globe and rapidly pushing us toward World War III, and even now openly and aggressively assaulting our own citizens in our own country with what can only be considered weather warfare that carries grave ramifications even after the disaster itself occurs because of the subsequent potential contamination from countless sources that we'll try to cover in more thorough detail in another broadcast. It's time to wake up. We don't have tomorrow if we don't face these realities today. So what do you do? What do each of us do? What can each of us do? And we can do plenty if we simply try. And that's the first step in the journey of 1,000 miles, is to get up off the bench and start marching. And all of us need to do that. First, arm yourselves, again, with credible data so that you can effectively and efficiently wake those around you. And why is that so important? Because the only way forward is to reach a critical mass of awareness, which means waking up military families, military personnel, so they understand what they're participating with, waking up law enforcement so they understand what they're participating with, waking up the families of people in the medical industrial field so that their families understand that participating in toxic vaccination programs for a paycheck and a pension is not okay. Only by reaching a critical mass, only by getting the U.S. military on our side, can we have any chance of prevailing in this battle, this all-important battle. It's like no other time in human history because everything is at stake. And consider this, based on all available data, if we remain on the current course, none of us will be here much longer. We have an incredibly short time horizon of less than a decade, based on multiple data sets. Biosphere implosion is occurring now. Decide why you're here, how you can help. Arm yourself with credible data. You can find that on the home page of geoengineeringwatch.org. Prioritize your time, your energy. Commit to making your voice heard in the battle for the greater good while it still matters, before the sand in the hourglass runs out. We must all make every single day count at this most critical point in time. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.